All right, so in the last lesson, we played around with making the database actually retain our data by using an actual file, and that meant that we had to take over some of the settings. So I showed you how to do that in the application.properties file, and then we played around a little bit with some of the cosmetic layout issues, I guess, and you learned a little bit about Bootstrap's responsiveness, which is kind of a cool thing. All right, so now here's what I want to show you. Let's say that we are on this page here and we haven't put any information in the form and we just click save. What's going to happen? Oh, look at that. It just lets us do that. And let me do it again. And there's a fourth record and a fifth record. That looks like a bit of a problem, doesn't it? We don't have any way of validating the data that's coming in here. So we're just allowing any and all random, button presses to put fake data or erroneous, useless data into our database. We probably don't want that to happen. So now I'm going to show you how we can stop that by using validation, okay? So there are a couple of parts to this. There is the cosmetic aspects of the validation, so where we can actually convey to the user of our form that they did something wrong and maybe even tell them what they did wrong and maybe even prevent them from being able to successfully submit their wrong data to us. And then there's the back end where we actually control all the wrongness in this particular implementation. Now, a lot of modern web application development would actually prevent the user from even being able to submit anything at all to the back end. But in order to keep this whole section simple and not have to introduce you to any more stuff like JavaScript or some cool JavaScript framework where we would do a lot of checking on the front end, I don't want to introduce you to that because that's a different language entirely. And you're already learning HTML a little bit now and a little tiny bit of CSS with Bootstrap. Just don't want to hit you with everything all at once, okay? So we're going to do all of our validation on the back end. And besides that, there are fantastic capabilities of doing validation on the back end, which you will see in just a moment, okay? So that's what we're going to do. All right, so let's jump into the IDE, and I guess we'll start with our domain model of all places, okay? So we'll go to the person class right here. And one of the dependencies that we added into our start.spring.io page when we built the original zip file that started off our project, one of those dependencies that we added in was a dependency called something validation. And in fact, let's even take a quick peek at that. Build.gradle. There it is. Let's see, there it is. Yes, Spring Boot Starter Validation. Okay, so this package we're going to actually make use of now. All right, and basically what we can do, and I think this is actually pretty cool, is we can put annotations on various fields to specify what kind of data is allowed in those fields, okay? And we're using a validation framework to do this, okay? And the framework is actually a two-part framework, but at the lowest level, it's actually the Hibernate framework. So that's the same framework that is actually talking to the database. Although in this case, we're not going to use it so much for database stuff. We're going to use it now just in general to validate that data that is trying to get entered into these fields matches up with what we want it to, okay? So let me show you how to do that. So I'm going to put a couple of spaces above the first name, and let's say that at the very least, we don't want the first name and last name to be blank. They're not allowed to be blank, okay? So there are a number of rules that we can use to do this via annotation, and one of them is called not empty. Okay, so we can specify not empty, and we can also specify a message to be relayed if it is empty. In fact, I forgot there we go, message. And so we can say something like first name cannot be empty, okay? We can do that. And I can put that on this field as well. Last name cannot be empty. And let's see, the date of birth. So we can even do some cool things for a field, for a date field. Like we can say, that it has to be a date in the past, okay? So you can't put like future dates in there. We can do at least that much. So we can specify a message and say date of birth must be in the past. And then here's a good one, email. There are actually a lot of complex rules around validating emails. Now, we could have done a regular expression, and in fact, there is an annotation of the validation framework that would allow us to specify a regular expression. However, we'd never write a good enough regular expression to capture all of the intricacies of a valid email, and thankfully, we don't need to. Instead, we can simply use the email constraint right there. And we'll specify a message, and we can say email must be valid. I don't know, something like that. Okay, so maybe that's enough for right now. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is jump over to the controller, and we need to tell Spring MVC to make use of our validation rules. And this is pretty cool. So to do this, all we need is another annotation. Now, this annotation will be a little different than what I think we've ever seen before, because this annotation will go inside of the parameters here. So it's called valid, okay? And then let me import that. All right, so we're telling Spring MVC to validate any data that is coming in from the web browser that's trying to get bound to this person instance here, okay? We're just telling it to perform validation on all of that. Now, if that doesn't work out, we'd also like to get some feedback. And we can do that by specifying that we also want Spring MVC to feed us the results of this validation attempt, okay? And all we have to do to get those results is to refer to this object called errors, and we'll create an instance of that. Well, we're not creating the instance. Spring MVC will create the instance, but it'll drop it off in this variable here. And then we can do whatever we want with that variable, okay? So if there are any errors, well, even if there aren't, this object will be populated. And then we can check that object to see, hey, are there any errors or not, okay? And then finally, what we can do is this bit here conditionally, okay? So we're gonna say like, do this if there aren't any errors, okay? And so I'm gonna wrap all of that in an if block, and I'm gonna say errors. So I'm gonna flip that logic around and put a not. If there are not any errors, then go ahead and save that person and redirect back to the people page with a clean slate and refresh the table with whatever is in the database, right? So that would be what we would normally want. However, if there are errors, we don't want to redirect back to a clean version of the page. We want to actually take you back to the page with all of its state still there. And by state, I mean all of the fields and values that were in the form before. We want all of that to be repopulated. If you recall, before we were using this redirect people and we were just doing return people, things were sort of working, but the form wasn't getting cleared out, right? It was actually retaining all the stuff that we had filled in. We didn't want that in that case. But if there were errors and you filled out all of this stuff and you submitted and then you got errors, you wouldn't want the stuff that you had filled in here to go away. You'd actually want that then, right? So we actually can make use of that behavior that we were getting before we implemented this redirect, okay? So that, in this case, it would be a good thing to have. So what we can do is just alternatively do another return and still just specify people, but no redirect now, okay? So this will retain the state of everything that was in this page when it was submitted so that it can be resubmitted with any changes that anyone might implement, okay? Oh, and one more thing that would happen now is that these errors here would also be made available to that page if there were any errors. Now, they're not going to show up by default. We have to actually do some HTML to make those show up, okay? But they will be put into the model for us, okay? All right, so we're actually done here. So then let's jump back over to the HTML template and let's make it so that if there are any errors, they will show up, and we'll get some nice formatting also, okay? All right, so how do we do this? Well, I don't have that memorized and I don't need to memorize it. What I will do is come over here to Bootstrap and we can see how we can implement validation for a Bootstrap form. All All right, or we can get some ideas at least, okay? Take some inspiration, if you will. So let's see here. All right, so what we're going to be doing is validation on the server side as opposed to validation on the client side, which would be in the browser using JavaScript typically. So for that, we need to come down here to the validation area where it talks about how to do it for the server side, which is right here, okay? And so we can look at some of these examples here and get a sense for the gist of what they're doing. So basically what they are doing is the input field here has a class, and we've got, let's see here, let's go down to our table. I mean, not our table, but our form. Okay, so here are our fields. So there's an input field here, and it's class form control. So look at what they're doing here, class form control, but then they're specifying an additional style, and they have an option here of either is valid or is invalid, okay? So if it's invalid, then you can set that class style to is invalid, or you can add that style to the class, okay? So we need a way to conditionally add the is invalid style to an input if there is an error, okay? That's what we need to do, okay? So how can we do this? Well, so obviously the first thing is we needed to kind of see how to do this so that it'll look nice using, in this case, Bootstrap, okay? But then we'll also have to figure out how to do this with the Thymeleaf framework, okay? So first thing I'm going to do though is copy some of what they've got here, because in addition to setting this style for invalid, if it is invalid, they're also showing the validation error message in a div underneath that widget. And we probably do want to copy this and display that optionally as well. Okay, so I'm going to just copy that little bit there. And then I'm going to come over here and let's see, I will do a shift enter, and then I'm going to paste that in. And I need to name this something. Validation. Okay, I hate naming these things. Validation first name. All right. Now this text here, I think isn't going to matter because that's going to get replaced automatically with whatever the error messages are that are associated with this guy. Okay. That's how we're going to do this. All right. So now let's put that on hold for a minute and jump over to Thymeleaf. Okay. Now, to find out how to use validation, we actually can't use the generic Thymeleaf documentation. We need to look at the Thymeleaf documentation for using Thymeleaf with Spring, with the Spring framework, okay? Because Thymeleaf has special support for being used with Spring, and thankfully they've got great documentation right here for that. So we're going to jump into this documentation now. So when you want to just do like kind of generic stuff with Thymeleaf, that first documentation page that we were on is fine. But when you want to find out a little bit more about how to use Thymeleaf specifically with the Spring framework, then you need to jump into this version of the documentation. Sorry that they have these two separate things, but I guess in theory, Thymeleaf can be used with other technologies besides Spring. And that's the reason that they have that in that way. All right, so let's see here. We want to know how to validate, and here we go. Here's the validation stuff here. And again, I'm showing you this so that you would have some idea of how you can find out these things for yourself. Okay, that's the reason I'm showing these to you rather than just putting in a bunch of stuff, which obviously I could do, but then you'd be wondering, how did you know to do that? And I wouldn't be showing you every single case there is, right? I'd only be showing you use cases that are specific to what I'm doing right here. But if you ever wanted to do something a little different from what I'm doing, well, now you'll know where to go in the documentation to find that, okay? So we are going to want a way to add in an additional class on our input fields, like right there, for example, right? So if there is an error, we want an additional class to be specified there. And I think it was called is-invalid, right? We want that to show up there. So how can we do that? Well, one thing we could do is what they're showing right here. they're overriding the class attribute with their own version of the class attribute, th::class, and then they're digging into the fields of the object in question, which would be the person, and then they're calling this method has error. So they're saying, does this particular field that we're on, which in this case would be the date planted field, does that field have errors? If it does, that's what this little ternary operator thing is essentially doing there. If this field has errors, then render out a class called field error. Now that would work for a lot of people, but it won't quite work for us because we want this style here to still be here. We want this class here. We want this class to still be here also. So we want to add another class to this. And with this approach, we'd be overriding what's already here in this static class. We'd be getting rid of that completely and then just replacing it with this other thing. And so that's not ideal for us, okay? We want to add an additional class to the list of classes here. And thankfully, there is a way to do that as well. And what we can do is this option down here, th::error class, okay? So this allows us to specify a class that should be added to our list of classes if there is an error. That's basically what that does, okay? And that's what we want. So let's do that. So I'm gonna just grab that and I'm gonna come up here. And I guess I'll just put it right here. Now, we want ours to say is invalid. And remember, now that's coming from Bootstrap, right? Right there, is invalid. Okay, that's what we want. If that field is invalid, then that's what we should get. So you see here how they have class equals form control and is invalid, okay? So if there is an error on the first name field, then this value is invalid will be added to this class attribute here. And let me explain something else real quick here. I just realized I hadn't explained this, okay? And I'm sorry, but obviously I can't go infinitely deep into all of this in this last section, okay? I can only go so far, but I will explain this real quick. These Thymeleaf attributes here, what happens is Thymeleaf actually rewrites some of this HTML when it's executing. So for example, this th field attribute here will rewrite the ID attribute with whatever value matches up to here, which in this case would be the same thing that we already have there. It will also, I believe, render a name attribute because sometimes you need that. It'll do a few things, okay? This th::error attribute here will check if there are any errors, and then if there are some, it will take this value and add it onto the existing class attribute. Okay, so that's what that would do. Okay, so that's kind of how they work. And then we also need to make this error message thing here conditional. Like we don't want that to render unless there are actual errors. And so for that, we actually do want to use this th::errors annotation right here, okay? And so what we need to do there is simply add that on, th::errors equals, and then we point it at, well, I always want to use the $sign. I don't know why I keep doing that. And then we point it at the field that we are referring to, which in this case would be the first name field. All right, so what this th::errors attribute does is it checks if there are errors for the first name field in the backend in Spring, then it will allow whatever element it's on, which in this case, this th::errors attribute is on the div, is on this div element here, it will allow that to render, okay? That will render. But if there are not any errors, then this will just disappear when we are running our application, okay? So that will only show up if there are errors on the first page. And it will also populate this area right here with whatever error messages are associated with this field, okay? Which is why I don't need to replace this with anything, okay? That'll get replaced automatically if there are errors. Otherwise, it just won't even show up at all, all right? So sorry, I know I have to explain a lot here, but man, you know, that's how it goes sometimes with programming, okay? So now that I've done all of that, I'm going to copy this and let's see, and I'm gonna do the same thing on each of these remaining fields where we're doing validations at least. So let's see, we'll call this one validation last name, and we'll change this to last name, last name, and I need to add in the th error class is invalid. Okay. In fact, you know what? Let me just do that consistently first. So there it is there, and let's add it to the date of birth as well. Paste space and email, paste space, and I didn't do salary. Might look at that later, but this is enough for now. Okay. And then let's do this in a few more places as well. So we'll put this on the bottom of this input field here. And we will rename this to, what is this, DOB? Validation DOB. DOB. And email. Now this already has one div, but that's okay. We'll add another div. Validation email and email. All right. And I think that is all we need. So now let's refresh. Okay, presumably that did something. We'll see here in just a second. So let's just hit this button and see what happens. Hey, look at that. Yeah, see? Now it's complaining about these things. Now, it didn't do anything on the date of birth, and I think that's because of the fact that we're using this weird browser-provided date of birth field. And it also didn't do anything on the email, and I think that's because I didn't specify that the email couldn't be blank or empty, okay? We'll play around with that in just a minute, all right? But let's satisfy these two fields. So let's see here. Jerry Maguire. All right, and then let's try that again. Okay, so that allowed that to go through. So I think what's happening here is that I didn't try to put any kind of date of birth at all, and our date of birth validation is allowing an empty date of birth. It's just not allowing actual dates of birth that are in the future, okay? And then it is allowing blank emails also. So let's go fix that now. So we'll go back over here to the person class. So for email, we will say that it's an email field and also that it cannot be empty. All right. Email must not be empty. And let's see, for the date of birth, I don't think we can do empty. I think that's only appropriate for strings, but I think we can do not null. Yeah, we can do not null. Oops, message, date of birth must be specified. Let's try that. Okay, so now let's try this again. Look at that. Now first name, last name, date of birth, and email are all throwing up errors, right? So that's looking pretty good. So let's do a Bruce Wayne, and I don't know, 1/1/1950. bwayne@batman.com. And let's specify, well, we won't specify a salary because I didn't put any validation on that. Okay, cool. And then let's try Wonder Woman. And let's put a date in the future. So 1/1/2023. And let's do no email. So let's try that. Okay. So it's saying, so it didn't retain that date of birth. And again, that has to do, I'm pretty sure, with the way that the browser is rendering the date here. I don't think I really want to play with that right now, but just know that that's because of the browser. Let's see, the email. Email must not be empty. Okay, so let's play around with email a little bit though. So let's do an invalid one, email address. Okay, so now what happened there is that the browser attempted to do a little bit of validation for us. And I don't actually want that at all. So to make sure that doesn't happen, what I can do is jump back over here to the form, and I can actually specify no validate. All right. So I can tell the browser, don't try to do any validation. Don't do me any favors. All right. So I'm going to restart. Okay. So now let's try that again. Invalid email. Email must be valid. Okay. Let's try wwoman at. Yep, and that's still not valid. Okay, so you got to do the whole thing. Wonder Woman at, I don't remember what island Wonder Woman is from, but island.com. All right, so yeah, cool. So now that's not an error anymore. And now the only field that's in error is this date, which won't be retained, unfortunately. I'll look that up maybe. And maybe if I figure out how to do that, I'll teach in one of the future lessons, okay? But for now, let's try one more time a date in the future. Yep, so we got the date of birth must be in the past. Okay, cool. So that's how that can work. So now nobody can put stupid stuff in here and get past our validation at least, okay? And yeah, let's go ahead and put some validation on the salary field now as well. So I will copy that and paste it right below and call this salary and name this salary as well. And then jump back into the person class and put some kind of a rule on the salary now. So this will be a numeric rule. Let's see what annotations we've got here. So one way you could look this up kind of easily, I guess, is just to come up here to the imports and see that all the constraints are coming from this package Javax validation constraints. So if you put your cursor right there and then hit Control Space, you can kind of get a quick peek at a lot of what your options are, okay? So let's see, we've got digits and we've got decimal. So we can specify a maximum decimal and a minimum decimal. I don't know, that might be useful. We could say like you have to put in a number that's at least, you know, over $1,000 or something like that. Well, 1,000, right? So that's one quick way that you can kind of just see what some of the options are. By the way, that if you wanted to do regular expressions, there's your guy right there, pattern. That would allow you to specify regex. So yeah, let's try this decimal min. All right, so we'll throw that on there, at decimal min. All right, so let's see, we have to provide it a value. Whoops. Value equals, and this will take a string though. So I don't know, let's try, you have to have a minimum of 1,000 and then a message salary must be at least 1,000. Okay, so, and maybe also we don't want to allow that to be empty, right? Now again, this is not a text field, so I can't use not empty, but I can use not null. Okay, so let's do a not null. And then we'll provide a message and we'll say salary cannot be empty or whatever, or must be specified or whatever you want to say there. Okay, so let's restart. All right, so now if I try to save, I didn't get anything there for the salary. Let's see, did I not finish putting in all of the fields for the salary? Oh yeah, I did not. The error class, yeah. th error class equals is invalid. There we go. Salary cannot be empty. Okay. And then let's try a salary that is below $1,000. So let's do 900. Salary must be at least 1,000. Okay. Let's do 1,000 even and see if that passes. Yep, that does it. But right below that, so let's do 999. Yep, so that validation rule is working well. All right, so I think that is more than enough for this lesson. And in the next lesson, I think we're going to probably tackle the ability to delete records from the database, okay? So I will see you in the next one. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this content and you'd like to help me out, there are several ways you could do that. First, you can always click the like and subscribe. That'll help me out a lot. Additionally, another way you can help me out is to check the link in the description below. That'll link you to my website where you can find additional courses. And finally, for those of you who might be interested in starting a new career as a professional software developer, I offer a free PDF guide that will detail exactly how you can get started in this field with no college degree and no prior experience. All you need to do is click on the link in the description below. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.